in 2020 under the ETS as legislated, or doesn't the Minister know?
The Hon Dr NICK SMITH.
Speaker, officials advised me that on a business-as-usual basis, we would expect in 2020 New Zealand's emissions to be 41% above 1990 levels. Currently, we're about 23% above those 1990 levels. And I think that really brings home. Now, the member opposite interjects and says the net. The difficulty is this. In 2020, I am advised that the contribution from forestry will be offset by the harvesting of trees. In other words, while we've banked on forestry offsetting our increase in emissions over the period of the Kyoto Protocol, we cannot count on that in 2020, and that is why the member's question is quite relevant. That is, because our gross emissions are 24% above 1990 levels, it is going to be a very difficult challenge for New Zealand even to get back to 1990 levels.
Point of order, the Honourable Rodney Hyde.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Just a point of order about the Minister addressing the question. The Minister had two parts to it. The Minister addressed the first part, which was what the emissions would be on do nothing. Then a member from the other side interjected it, and I think he got diverted answering that question. He didn't answer the second part. It may be that it's not his intention to, but the second part was by how much would the ETS reduce the net emissions by?
The honourable member knows, of course, that only one part of a question needs to be answered. If the honourable member wishes to provide the information for the House,
very happy to oblige the
Nick Smith.
With respect to the current emissions trading scheme, I don't have the number on me. It is contained in the regulatory impact statement on the original ETS. One of the uncertainties with respect to that is the extent of the carbon price, because the higher the carbon price, the more likely emissions in 2020 would be less. However, the government is working on a package of amendments to the ETS to better balance the environmental and economic factors that need to be carefully considered.
Jeanette Fitzsimons.
Has he seen research from the forestry industry showing that with a price on carbon of around $25 a tonne and policy certainty from the government, they would plant 25,000 hectares a year additional forests for the next 10 years, and that if they did, this would completely cancel out the effect of the harvesting of the post-1990 forests and give 10.9 million tonnes more carbon stored by 2020.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Speaker, the member is correct, and that is the extent to which we plant trees has a huge impact on our capacity to be able to meet targets in 2020. The difficulty is that while it is true that foresters get credits at the time of which they plant and those trees grow, they also receive a debit at the time of harvest. And some of the caution from forestry investors is that with the carbon price likely to rise with time, it's not necessarily as profitable as some of the analysis would show. One of the very important issues in the international climate change negotiations is New Zealand getting recognition for the stored carbon from tree products, forest products, and that is why this government gives that issue in those international negotiations such priority.
Charles Chauvel.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Isn't it highly misleading to the New Zealand public to claim that a bold target will cripple the economy when the reports relied upon by the Ministry for the Environment and others show that under all scenarios GDP actually increases, and that those reports also fail to take into account any changes in behaviour to reduce emissions or any complementary government measures that reduce emissions?
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Speaker, I think the underlying important issue is that reducing emissions is actually quite difficult for New Zealand. And I simply say to the member opposite, if it was so easy, why is it that over the last 18 years we've seen such a dramatic increase? Now, the member opposite may say that the $14.5 billion per year that a -40 target would entail, which is what the NZEI Infometrics analysis showed, the Labour Party may think that $14.5 billion per year is insignificant. Members on this side of the House think it is, and that is why we intend to carefully balance, just as we campaigned, we're going to carefully balance this government's climate change policies with their objectives for New Zealand to be more economically successful.
Jeanette Fitzsimons.
Does the Minister accept that meeting a bold target is not just about sitting back and waiting for business as usual to do it for us, but actually needs some proactive government actions? And that if he caps the price of carbon, as the Australians are proposing, we can expect much higher emissions in 2020 than now, and that the design of the ETS, if it's weakened, is going to make it harder to meet a target in the future.
The Hon Dr NICK SMITH.
The member's absolutely right to draw attention to the balance. The more ambitious the target, the greater the cost is for New Zealanders. And where I would challenge the Green Party to be more upfront with New Zealanders is that if you want to promote a 40% reduction target, remember we're already 24% ahead, then the Green Party needs to be upfront with what sort of impact that will have on power prices, on petrol prices, and jobs for people in sectors like the agricultural sector. All that I have seen from the Greens to date grossly underestimates what those costs are for ordinary New Zealanders.
Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister stand by his statement that it is too hard for us to have a responsible target and too expensive, in light of the fact that the Greens today have released a study which shows that New Zealand can meet those kind of targets, a responsible target of 30 to 40% reductions, and not only that, that in the long term New Zealand has no choice. And that is the real challenge to us as a nation, is we have no choice. Our economy must become a low-carbon economy if we are to have a prosperous economy in the 21st century.
The Honourable Dr NICK SMITH.
Well, firstly, I have never said what the member alleged. What I have said is that a minus 40% target, when we're starting at about minus 24, is unrealistic. And I put this to the member. During the course of the 1990s, New Zealand's emissions went up by 10%. During the course of this decade, they are predicted to go up by another 14%. Do I think over the course of the next 10 years we can do minus 64? I think it is unrealistic, and I would remind the member that when his colleague Jeanette Fitzsimons was the spokesperson for the government on energy efficiency, emissions went up.